And we'll begin with our prayer. Master of all worlds, highest power, merciful parent of compassion, in your presence, eternal one, source of strength for us, as you have been for our ancestors, we very humbly acknowledge you. What are we? What is our life that you have done such great kindness to us? Therefore, we place our appeals before you, so that you may forgive and absolve us of all our faults and failings. Let our faults never become barriers between us and you. And may it be your desire to prepare our hearts to feel awe and love for you. May you listen to these words of ours. May you open our encumbered hearts through the mysteries of your Torah. May this our study be a source of pleasure before your throne of glory like sweet incense. May you shower down upon us the light of our soul source in all the ways by which we define ourselves. May the sparks of your holy servants, through whom you have revealed these words to the world, shine and sparkle. May their merit, their ancestors' merit, and the merit of their Torah, their innocence, and their holiness stand for us so as to prevent us from stumbling when we study these words. In their merit, may our eyes be illumined by what we study. As in the saying of the sweet singer of Israel, open my eyes, that I may gaze into wonders of your Torah. May the words of my mouth, the thoughts of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. For it is the eternal who grants wisdom. It is from his mouth that knowledge and understanding issue forth. Na 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 na. Ah, na na na. Na 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 na. Ah, na na na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na na na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Ah, na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Ah, na na na. Na 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 na. Oh na na na. Na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Oh na 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 na. Good evening to everyone. Left off at the bottom of page 343, beginning of this next little section, and this very intriguing setup with Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yechizkiah sitting under the tree in the field of Ono, and Rabbi Chia falls asleep, sees Elijah, and he says to him, "Oh, look at how you shine, look at how you glow. You make the field glow." So the field is a field, and the field, of course, is also Shekhinah. And we had, as I mentioned last time, we have a kind of a a similarity in the Torah portion that we're in, the beginning of the Torah portion. Jacob falls asleep, has a vision. Here, Rabbi Chia falls asleep and has a vision. But there's a lot of contrast as well. And this will set up what we're going to see in a second when we turn the page. Jacob is desperate. Jacob is vulnerable. Jacob is in trouble. There's none of that indications here. Jacob is all by himself. Here, Rabbi Chia has a comrade. Rabbi Chizkiah is with him. We don't know what's going on with Rabbi Chizkiah at the moment. Only Rabbi Chia falls asleep, and only Rabbi Chia has this vision. But he has it, and he's overjoyed to see a revelation of Elijah, Gilui Eliyahu. So now we turn the page, and I don't know how it happened this way, but this next little paragraph or so comes at this very moment in our own lives, and this very terrible, terrible, difficult, upsetting for us. We're safe and sound, but what we know about what's going on in Israel is terribly distressing, and in many ways, and I'm not going to editorialize about it, but it's awful. And now here we have this text, which I can only just read it and sort of take it to heart in a very, very immediate way. So here's Elijah. Who's going to read for us tonight? Ah, look at that. Surprise. All right, Meryl.
He said,
yeah, top of 344.
Okay. He said, "Now I have come to announce that Jerusalem is about to be destroyed, along with all the towns of the sages. For Jerusalem is judgment, based upon judgment, and is destroyed because of judgment. Samael has already been empowered over her and over the mighty of the world. So I have come to inform the sages, perhaps they can prolong the life of Jerusalem. For as long as Torah is found within her, she endures. since Torah is the tree of life standing over her. As long as Torah is aroused below, the tree of life does not depart above. If Torah ceases below, the tree of life withdraws from her. So as long as sages delight in Torah, Samael cannot prevail against her. For look what is written. The voice is the voice of Jacob. The voice, supernal Torah called voice of Jacob. As long as this voice does not cease, speech reigns and prevails, so Torah below must never cease.
Okay. Well, actually, go one more line.
Rabbi Hia awoke. He went and told his word to the sages.
Okay. So we'll stop here. So this paragraph is a heavy paragraph. What can I say? I mentioned that we have a little bit of an echo or a reflection when we start the story to see this as a parallel to the Jacob situation. But it's also, as I said, in many ways the reverse. And here we have it as a real reverse, right? Because what is revealed to Rabbi Chia here is a revelation of doom, warning, and an appeal. When Jacob has his vision, and he has the angels going up and down the ladder from earth to heaven, and then the culmination of that part of the vision is his vision of God. And where is God? Where is God? Not asking a general question. I'm asking in the story with Jacob in the Torah. In that episode,
In our love.
standing over him, right? And then he sees that God is standing right over him. Here we have the Torah is the tree of life standing over her, right? So we have another echo, but the standing and the vision that he has, what Elijah is telling him here, and God stands over Jacob, and then God says, I'm protecting you, I'm taking care of you, don't worry, nothing bad is going to happen to you. I'm gonna escort you and be with you wherever you are, right? And that's the promise that Jacob sees in his dream. And here we have the opposite. Here we have that Jerusalem is about to be destroyed. It's already been handed over into the hands of Samael, of the evil one, the angel of death, the wicked side. And Elijah is coming down to Rabbi Chia and begging him, maybe you can do something to save Jerusalem. Maybe you can help. Maybe something can be done among you sages who study Torah. Maybe you can find a way to as he put it here, prolong the life of Jerusalem so that it doesn't get destroyed imminently. So this is, as I say, it's a very, different, opposite kind of vision, and it's a vision of terrible, terrible darkness. So he says Jerusalem is about to be destroyed. If we look at the note on 197, we're going to, I'll just summarize it. We don't have to read the whole thing. We have a little bit of a curiosity that everybody notices. Rabbi Chia lives, whatever it is, 70 years or 100 years or more. I mean, the Zohar is very sloppy with its chronology, but if Rabbi Chia is a student of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they're living 70 to 100 years after the temple was already destroyed. So this is a little bit of a little messed up in terms of the history. So everybody scrambles around to try to figure out what this means. And one of the standard suggestions is, it doesn't say the temple will be destroyed. It says Jerusalem will be destroyed. Whatever shreds of continued life it was in Jerusalem will now be obliterated, will now be wiped out. But the real answer is that we're not talking history here. We're talking an image. We're talking, a vision, and we're talking about some sense of a dreadful, dreadful premonition of destruction, for what's for the sacred center of the Jewish people. Why? Because Jerusalem is judgment, is based on judgment, and is destroyed because of judgment. So this is a serious statement that we could now profitably read a note for. Let's read 198, please.
Jerusalem is judgment. Jerusalem symbolizes Shekhinah, who derives from din, judgment, justice. Justice lodges there.
Right, that's in Lamentations. Lamentations is Eicha, the book that bemoans the destruction of the first temple. So Tzedek Talinba, right? And that's written in a kind of a wonder. This is supposed to be the city where justice dwells, and yet it was a city that was full of iniquity and was brought down low and destroyed, instead of being the city of beauty and inspiration that it was supposed to be. Go ahead.
The continued existence of Jerusalem and the fulfillment of Shekhinah depend upon justice. When this is lacking, Shekhinah weakens and Jerusalem becomes vulnerable to harsh judgment. Rabbi Yochanan said, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they rendered judgment there strictly in accordance with the law of Torah, rather than going beyond the requirements of the law.
So that's one of the really astonishing statements in rabbinic tradition. We're more familiar with the explanation that Jerusalem was destroyed because of baseless hatred, because people didn't get along with each other, which is an important lesson to learn. But this particular statement in the Talmud says that it was destroyed because of a scrupulous application of Jewish law by the judges, by the leaders, by the religious authorities, and without thinking about where the law was leading to, without thinking about what the context of the law was supposed to be, without thinking of what the essence of the law is supposed to accomplish. So this is a self-critical statement within rabbinic literature, sort of warning all of the rabbis, don't, lose sight of the forest because of any particular tree, and blaming, the rabbis, or blaming potentially some rabbis for the weakness of mistaking, halachic acuity and the letter of the law, quote unquote, with what really is supposed to be accomplished by the law. So, we have. I will editorialize. We have one of the many pieces of the terrible, horrible situation in Israel is the Sheikh Jarrah controversy, right? You have a neighborhood of houses in Jerusalem that was once upon a time a Jewish neighborhood, and now it's an Arab neighborhood. And the Jews, for a number of years already, have been pushing to kick the Arabs out of where they've been living for 70 years or so, and reclaim by right. This is their right. They've got the deeds. They've got the property, documentation. So the law is on their side, and in fact, the law was decided in their favor way back, about 10 years ago or something. Strict application of the law. Of course, the application of the law in that particular situation doesn't match the application of the law for any Arab who has the deed to property that he inhabited in 1948 and then lost occupation of because of the war, and no Arabs are allowed to go back to their property. No Arabs are given recognition of their ownership of property that they once upon a time made use of. But on the other hand, hey, the Jewish person is waiving his property deed from 1948, and what's right is right. So there's a lot of terrible stuff. Besides the bloodshed and the death and the suffering and the destruction, there's injustice. And what the Zohar is following in a long line of rabbinic tradition is that Jerusalem is judged by whether or not it's based on justice and whether it proceeds based on justice or not, and vice versa. We have a verse in the prophets: Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh, v'shaveh b'tzedakah. Jerusalem will only be redeemed from justice. And of course, depending on which direction you're in, on the right side or the left side, it's really interesting. Of course, for the Zohar, the right side is the side of Chesed. But politically today, the right side is not the side of Chesed. If you're on the right side, that verse means, yeah, Jerusalem will be redeemed, rightfully so, absolutely. We're going to get back what we want and what we deserve and what's ours, and no question about it. Hold on a second. But the real meaning is the only hope for Jerusalem to be redeemed is to be righteous and to be devoted to fair judgment for everybody. So Len, you have is that a question? Lifni mishurat hadin. What does that phrase mean? That phrase means to go beyond the letter of the law. Literally, it means within the line of the law. Instead of insisting, here's the line, here's what the law says is the line. No, give a little bit, give in a little bit. That's a classic concept within Jewish law, that we are actually obligated to deal lifnim mishurat hadin, not to insist on shurat hadin, not to insist on the absolute line of the law, but to go within the line of the law, and that means to be willing to compromise, willing to be more generous than what the law says, relinquish some of your sense of your own entitlement, or your own feeling of power about judging somebody else. So, a serious demand. So what Elijah is saying here is that's it. Judgment has decided based on the criteria that justice demands. Jerusalem is sentenced to destruction. Samael has already been empowered over her and over the mighty of the world. Who are the mighty of the world? The mighty of the world are the sages, right? Lo b'chayev v'lo b'choach ki im beruchi, amar Hashem tzvakos. We're not talking about physical might. We say in the Psalms, Lo b'gvurat hasus yechpat, v'lo b'shokei ha'ish yirtzeh. Right? God is not desirous of the mighty battle horse and the muscles of the warrior, right? But rather with reverence for God. So the my spirit, right? Ki'im beruchi, amar Hashem tzvakot, right? It's my spirit that counts. So those are the mighty, the ones who have God's spirit infused within them and who are dedicated to studying Torah. So, so he says, I've come to inform the sages. Perhaps they can prolong the life of Jerusalem. So it's all up to the sages, not up to God. So Larry puts in the quote, right? Right. Psalm 122 is a very, very pertinent psalm these days to be recited again and again and again. So Elijah is begging the sages, if you know about this, now you know how urgent the need is. Maybe you can do something. Maybe you can extend life support to Jerusalem by studying Torah. So as I said, the reversal of the roles here. Instead of God being the protector, maybe we can change things and maybe we can protect Jerusalem. In the note below on 199, it's pointed out that this is very reminiscent of Hechalot texts. Hechalot texts are, the word Hechalot means palaces, celestial palaces, and it's a mystical body of literature that was created in rabbinic times, late rabbinic times. It's about the body of literature records people trying to ascend up into the palaces of heaven, right? One palace into another palace, into another palace. And one of the famous texts, because it was incorporated into our Yom Kippur liturgy, is in part of the martyrology, is the story of the 10 sages of Israel who were murdered by Roman authorities, the Hadrianic persecutions. So around the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in the mid-2nd century CE, and there we have again a kind of a reverse story where the Romans are clamping down on the Jews and oppressing them. And Rabbi Yishmael, Kohen Gadol, Rabbi Yishmael, the high priest, purifies himself, ascends to heaven, and then wants to find out, is this really a decree that has been decreed from heaven or not? So the same way we have over here, yes, the decree has gone out. Decree has gone out from heaven. And then he hears about it, and then he comes down and he informs the other sages. And what he informs the other sages is that there is no hope. He informs the other sages this is a final decree, and the best and the brightest and the holiest of us are doomed. We will be killed. So and then it goes through the 10 sages, each one tortured and killed by the Romans. So this is part of the traditional Yom Kippur liturgy. I want to indulge myself, and I'm going to try here I'm going to stop the recording because I've been told that I can't play YouTube recordings on a recorded talk, because then it becomes, because we're going to then put out the recording and then we have to deal with copyright and so on. So this is just for us, but I want to play a cantorial rendition of that section of the martyrology. It was composed and it was sung by the composer, and the composer was a famous chazan from the golden age of cantorial singing in America, Zavo Kvartin. And I'm going to hopefully be able to get this. So first, I'm going to stop the recording. So that conveys maybe a little bit of the emotion that's going on here. And what Elijah is pleading for is the reverse here, right? In that martyrology piece, all of the sages of Israel have been sentenced to death to atone for the Jewish people. And here Elijah says, maybe we can stop this. Maybe if the sages of Israel double down in studying Torah, maybe the decree can be averted. Maybe it can be delayed at least, or postponed, or mitigated. Because as long as Torah is aroused below, as long as we study Torah in a way that tries to lift up the Torah, then the tree of life does not depart above. So we have, again, and this is appropriate also for Shavuos, we have this connection, this dynamic that keeps on going, the way the angels go up and down the ladder between the giving of the Torah and the study of the Torah, between God's gift of the Torah to us and then our gift of the Torah back to God. That when we can make the Torah something that's a tree of life for ourselves, then this actually suffuses the divine, it suffuses God with life. It gives God power and life again. As long as sages delight in Torah, Samael cannot prevail against her. Samael will not be able to destroy Jerusalem, will not be able to take over the control of how the energies, the powers that are so great in the world, will they be for destruction and for injustice, for pain, for suffering, or will that same kind of power be for the opposite, will be for life and for good? So the voice is the voice of Jacob. In the Hebrew, the words kol, the word kol is one right after the other. Hakol, kol, Yaakov. Right? Two voices. Right? The voice is the voice of Jacob. But there are two voices. There's the voice on high. Talked about this a little bit yesterday. It was recorded. It's part of the Shavuos videos that will be available for the Tikkun. You have the Kol Gadol Velo Yasaf. When we were at Mount Sinai, we heard a great voice. And then there's the voice of Jacob. And then there's the voice of Israel, the voice of studying Torah. But of course, the voice of Jacob is also, we can reverse it. The voice of Jacob is Israel, is the core, central trunk of God's presence, which is the Torah. Tiferet is Torah shebichtav, is actually the divine Torah. And then the Torah comes down into the world as Torah Sheba'al Peh. Our puny little voices, right? The oral Torah. We answer God with our voices of Torah. the story of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai in Exodus says, Moshe yedaber b'hai Elokim ya'anenu b'kol. Moses would speak, and the Almighty would respond to him with a voice, with a sound. And the Rashbam says, nobody could hear Moses' voice. Only God could hear Moses' voice. Moses is a flesh and blood. Moses is just a guy. Put a guy up on top of a mountain and let him talk, see how many people will hear it. But then God's great voice comes and gives answer to Moses' little human voice. So that's what's supposed to happen here. As long as this voice does not cease, speech reigns and prevails. Right? So speech is dibur. Speech is the way the Torah then is effective in this world here. Right? Kol is the divine source. Speech is the way that that divine source gets enunciated, gets pronounced, gets spoken in this world. And that's dependent on us. Right? So Torah below must never, never cease. But back to that note before, what kind of Torah? Torah is also powerful. And the power that Torah has can be used either constructively or destructively. So this is Elijah begging us, can you please try to use the Torah in a way that won't destroy the world? We're using the Torah, I say we, all present company excluded. But certainly in Israel, too much of the Torah by too many people is being used to burn down the world. Because the Torah really is powerful enough to do that. If it can burn down the world, can it also light up the world? But that depends on who the mighty ones will be. Who is going to take control over the power of the Torah? The people who have it now and who are bringing terrible injustice and suffering and death to the world, or some other alternative group of people? Who will they be? Does anybody want to make any comments or anything? Yeah, David.
I was just typing my comment. And,
Instead of the written Torah, you'll give it as an oral Torah.
and curiously enough, that's my point. I'm scanning the chart that we're given at the beginning of the book, and I'm surprised to not see Yerushalayim associated with any of the Sefirot.
Yeah, Yerushalayim is the chart is an incomplete chart, right?
Sure.
The chart does not give you a rundown of every single term that is associated with all of these different groups. So that's the way it is. It's always going to be limited. Once upon a time, I actually used to ask my students to compile lists of the symbol clusters that they encountered as they were studying, so that you would make like grape clusters. The term comes from Rabbi Art Green. They're groups of associative imagery that cling together, and that then coalesce in different parts of this diagram. So you can take a pencil if you want and put Yerushalayim down there with Shechina. Right. So yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
And Torah Shabbat Peh.
Right. Is that written there? I don't remember what it's.
No, it's not.
So that's also, yeah, that has to be there too. And Tiferet should have written Torah, Torah shebichtav.
Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah, we go forward. Okay, so Rabbi Chia wakes up from this, I don't know if you want to call it, Mark Weinstein, hold on a second. Did anyone ever use Torah for good purposes? Other than an innocuous comment. What can I tell you? How about before I just, pontificate about these things? Does anybody want to respond to that? Yeah, Jen.
I'm sure you can find lots of good. We use the Torah, even though, for example, the Torah actually allows for slavery, probably a better form of slavery than existed in much of the world at the time. But it also was a driving force of abolition. And of course, it's been used for, all of religion, basically, it tends the worst criticism I've ever, and truest I think I've heard of religion, is that it makes good people better and bad people worse. Because, we each have a responsibility for how we read it and for what we take from it. So depending on what type of people we are, or we can use it to very good purposes or to very awful purposes. So I think, yes, of course it's been used for good. It's also been used for evil, and it's been used for in between.
Anybody else?
I would say just look at the Liberty Bell. There you go. It sets a motto or a model, I should say. Pursue justice. Unfortunately, we don't always do that, and nowadays it seems like it's not being done. But hey, at least at least the concept is there for some. Hopefully, somebody will say, this isn't just. Sometimes what we're doing is not justice. Let's really pursue justice.
So I think, okay, Larry, you wanted to say something?
I just want to say something personally. I think that the study of Torah over the last year, including this class and other, it just kept me alive. So I think that's pretty good.
So, good. Well, thank you for that. I want to, in a more general way, follow up a little bit on what Jen and what Craig were both saying. To a certain extent, the examples, most of the examples that you cite are actually influences of the Bible as they went out into the world. And then people were inspired and made the Liberty Bell, the abolition movement, and so on, right? And those are great examples of how the Torah has been an influence for good in the world. The Exodus story itself, there's a classic book by Robert Walser, Exodus and Revolution, which sort of charts out how the Exodus story has been an amazing inspiration for liberation movements all over the world throughout history, once they become aware of the story. But the question then sort of comes up, can we find examples that are just as compelling within the Jewish world of strict devotion to the Torah? Right? The examples that we're given there are of people who, to use, I don't know, maybe not such a great term, they're at the Torah once removed. Right? The Torah has gotten out there into culture, into civilization, and then people have been inspired by it. What about us?
That was my point, Rabbi.
Exactly.
My point was not about the beneficial use of words of a sacred text. My question was about people who dedicate themselves to the study of Torah.
Right.
the so-called sages. And
Right.
that, I think, has been a history that has been, pardon the expression, abysmal.
So I think that that's overstating it. I think that I would not buy that statement. I don't think abysmal is the correct characterization. I think checkered is better, or complicated. In other words, I think that we can see, I think that the Mishnaic and Talmudic period is a period not only of exciting developments in Torah study, but I think that overall, the effect on the Jewish people was very good, was life-saving, was saving of a nation, and was also a force for social betterment, in the sense of more justice and interpersonal relationships. I think that that's true. I mean, you have for all of, and I'm ready to criticize, and I've written plenty of critical stuff about, what I think is failings and so on. But again and again and again, if you want to be apologetic, it's all relative. And to the extent that the rabbinic culture is juxtaposed to the other cultures that are going around it, I think that the rabbinic culture comes out pretty good. As you go through time, there are places and individuals that are involved in tremendous good, in terms of working for the community. Maimonides was a tremendous communal leader. He was definitely a voice of goodness. So there are there are people, though, sometimes that stand out precisely because they're disgusted with what the other rabbis are doing. So it's a truism. There are plenty of people that get power, and that power can be either knowledge or political communal power, and then they're not worthy of it, but they have it and they use it badly. But there are tremendous numbers of stories of rabbis, not necessarily even famous rabbis, who had jurisdiction on their town, and they're the ones that stood up for the poor. They're the ones that fought the rich Jewish elites, and stood up in the name of Torah for what's right and for what's good. There's a long history of it, and much of it is documented, and much of it is not documented. So, it's been my source of sadness for me that it's not more obvious, it's not more salient that the Torah does good. I mean, I wrote a piece when Rabbi Ovadia Yosef passed away. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel for a period of time, and he was considered in his time to be the preeminent Torah scholar. His sons, sort of inherited his mantle. One of them became chief rabbi of Israel. One of them just got fired from being the rabbi of one of the Israeli towns because he's a paid government employee, right? All the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis in Israel, get paid by the government. And he was fired because the reform movement took him to court because he was being disgusting about how he spoke about Reform Judaism and Reform Jews. And they actually won in court, and he resigned. He was forced to resign from his position because he was not serving the entire city that he was supposed to be the civil servant for. So he learned from his father. His father was an amazing Torah scholar who was a nasty person, and who was not, he was a racist and a bigot. And I wrote an article in the New Jersey Jewish paper when he died, saying everybody's pouring out eulogies about how what a great rabbi he was. Sorry, he makes my life more difficult, because I'm trying to tell people that the Torah is wonderful, and he's proof positive that the Torah is not. So I think that the problem is an acute problem, but it's back to what Jen says. We make choices. The Torah is an atom bomb, or the Torah is a lot of atomic energy. We can make it into an atomic bomb, or we can make it into cancer radiation and things like that. What do we do with it? And the only people who can really do something with it are people who dedicate their lives to it. So it's on us. It's on us.
But then, Rabbi, the cliche is, there's good and bad in every race. That's what my mother taught me. I imbued that with my mother's milk, right? There's good and bad in every race. So I'm sure among Torah scholars there's good and bad, et cetera, et cetera. The question is, if you look at the group of people who dedicate themselves to the study of Torah, how do they compare with people who, for example, dedicate themselves to the study of medicine, or to the people who study themselves, dedicate to, the British reformers, the Episcopalians? I mean, is it true that the Torah is in some way this instrument for good, if what you mean by Torah is immersion in the study of Torah? Is there any reason historically, culturally, socially, even within the history of Judaism, to show that this kind of deep commitment to Judaism has had a positive effect? And I mean, I say this over and over again. I go through the motions probably as much, if not more, than most people. And yet I'm still not convinced that there's any real goodness to it. There may be personal meaning to it, but goodness, I don't know. So let me shut up and.
Right. Yeah, Jen.
Mark, does it have to be like on an enormous scale? Can it be like small individual things? We had in Torah study today about counting and numbers, and I had remembered at some point you don't count a person, you count like a half shekel or something, because you don't put a number on a person. It's something I've heard in our shul before. And that affected me hugely. Like it because in my job, sometimes each kid is assigned a number, and people rattle off the numbers without. It made me stop and never do that. I will only give a name and look at the picture of the kid we're talking about. And it's like a very small, tiny little adjustment. But in my job, it makes an enormous difference to me, like to be able to consider each kid individually. And that's something I learned in shul. I'm not a Torah scholar or anything, but it's this small little thing I learned by going to shul. And I think it's made me better. Like, I don't take any of those kids for granted.
I don't deny what you're saying. I don't deny what you're saying, but you could have got that from Paulo Freire, you could have got that from Nell Noddings, you could have got that from Rousseau, you could have got that from a million.
No, where I got it happened to be in our shul. I mean, yes, you can, because truth is truth, and I am very pluralistic, and I honor, I do actually go to, I hate to say, I'll go to Shinto shrines and another thing, I know even more pagan things than that, etc., and I don't have any issue. I worship in Hindu temples as well. So obviously, yes, I believe that the truth is out there and it's accessible to us in many different ways. God reaches out to us in many different ways. But I still found that in shul. That's where it it was somebody who said we couldn't count for a minyan, and they made a big deal out of it. I was like, oh wow. And then they brought up that shekel thing, and I was like, okay, it made a big difference in my life. I'm just saying, is it okay? Can you just look at tiny little things like that, or are you looking at like big picture? Like where are you focusing?
I think that we live obviously in a time when there's a tremendously magnified degree of access to every resource and every source. So you could make an argument, why take it from the Torah when you can take it from, go Google goodness and just find whatever it is that'll work for you. But of course, that's a little, actually, I don't think, it works mostly. And I think that it's ahistorical. We are, we're individuals and we are groups. And yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah. Yesterday I was in an interfaith clergy meeting, and unfortunately they asked me to close out the meeting. And there was discussion during the meeting where the theme came up about the ground you stand on. And what I said was that we need to understand that we stand on ground wherever we stand. By definition, nobody else can stand on that ground, right? By definition, nobody else can be in my place. And yet at the same time, we share common ground. So that interplay between recognizing what is my ground that nobody else can stand on, that nobody else can occupy, that's only going to be my ground that I have to sanctify and make holy ground. What is that relation, in relation to the common ground of all of us standing together, right? In a bigger, expansive way, right? I'm not going to be able to share common ground with anybody else unless I'm standing on my ground. So here's an example of where the Torah from within, and it's again a mixed bag, but nevertheless something I think that really has meaning. The Torah doesn't run around. The Torah as we practiced it, as we inherited it, as we took possession of it, and as we went out into the world with it, was not a crusading, did not present tell us to go out crusading. We didn't go out mostly, and of course, again, mostly, we didn't go out evangelizing or trying to convert a bunch of people. We allow conversion and we accept people joining us. And every time somebody wants to join us, we said, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just go be a good person on your own? What do you need us for? So this is actually codified within our tradition to say something like that, instead of saying, oh, of course, otherwise you're not, you're lost. If you don't join us, forget about it. So that's a kind of a self imposed or a self-created feature that we didn't have to do. We could have chosen to be very, very, suprematist about ourselves. And there's plenty of that in Jewish tradition, but that just shows how we could have actually gone the whole way, and we didn't. The official, accepted, totally sanctified tradition is that we are a people apart, and nevertheless, if somebody wants to join us, you can join us. Doesn't matter what your blood looks like, what your skin looks like, what your genes are. If you want to join, you join. I think that that's a very big accomplishment, considering some of the other ways that the people have used, their sense of excitement about their religion. So I think that that's good. So coming back to where we are, could I now wash away my Jewish identity and then now go off on a search for the best system, the best text, the best tradition, and see what it is that clicks with me? I think probably, it would be a total failure. I mean, again, speaking personally, I threw this stuff away for quite a while and came back to it because I just thought I was hurting myself. I came to that conclusion. But there's a guy, he recently died. He was a very holy person. His name was Yitzchak Buxbaum. I don't know if anybody heard of him. So he wasn't a rabbi, but he was a teacher and a preacher. They called him a Maggid. And he once said something. He said, what is this about? What's special about Judaism? And he said, Judaism to him was the story of a people who gave their peoplehood to God in service to God, instead of in service to themselves. So of course that doesn't describe Bibi Netanyahu, but I found that tremendously compelling. That we're a people. We're a very ancient people. We've continued to be a people. We have a certain identity as a people. We're not, the anybody else. And we've developed a way of life. We've been given a Torah, a specific Torah, and that gift to us, we reciprocate it and we say, we give you ourselves. Right? The famous Midrash, when God says, I want to give you the Torah, but what's the guarantee that you'll keep it? What am I throwing away my most precious possession? What maybe it's a waste. And the Midrash goes on, we'll give you Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God says, thank you very much. I got them already. So what? That doesn't give, we'll give you our prophets. And God says, well, the prophets are the prophets, but what about you? And finally, they said, we'll give you our children. Right? And then God says, okay. So then I'll give you the Torah. If you are taking this to run with, if you are taking this to make something out of it, that's what we do. We make something out of this. And then another group will make something, hopefully just as beautiful and just as precious to them, out of something else. But that doesn't take away the question, are we really doing it? Are we making something out of it? Or are we throwing it away? Or are we even actually debasing it and ruining it? Are we wasting it? Are we wasting a really good thing?
David, Rep, and I think that was what's in Mark's question.
Yeah.
Is there something in our Torah and our practice that allows us to not waste it, right? Or allows us to hold on to something beyond the letter of the law, right? Is there something in there that enables that to happen? Or are we just like every other gosh darn, fanatic group who finds a holy something and goes, is there something in that? And I want to see if I can make a segue to a conversation. Maya, our daughter, was marching from the State Department to the White House and took a picture of a black hatted, coated Chassid being interviewed. He was marching. And I was
marching for what? For what was the march for?
The march was protesting what was going on in Sheikh Jarrah. So my question was like, what is going on here? Why is he marching? And she says, well, he was brilliant. He's not a Zionist. And I'm still struggling with this. So she goes on to say, listening to him, he was all about compassion and rights to exist. He was able to see beyond the letter of the law and understand this deeper sense of Torah. And was marching in his full-on regalia. Sorry to be pejorative, but I've not been able to understand that sort of anti-Zionist sense, and because I've only seen it in people who've understood the letter of the law. And there was something powerful in that realization for me that got a little bit at Mark's question. And so it comes down to me that, you know, that footnote we read, 198, which says, you know, yeah, we've got to understand when we must read beyond the letter of the law. And that I'm not, where's the code book, right? When do you throw the book away and go deeper? And I think that was Mark's question, and it's a powerful one.
Right. The story that you told about the Haredi guy is it's a very complicated kind of story. It sort of gets us into a rabbit hole and a you know, it goes around in circles. I want to bring it back to Yitzchak Buchsbaum's point, where you know, in a certain, it's hard. I mean, I don't want to get into a polemic with that guy. I think that the short answer is that the Torah cannot guarantee how we will use the Torah, just like God cannot guarantee how we will use our lives. But that doesn't mean that life isn't precious and holy. God gives us the gift of life. I would imagine that most of us would say, yes, life is precious, life is of ultimate value. But guess what? Life is a you know, what do you call those variables? There's nothing about life that guarantees that it will be for the good. Torah is a tree of life. There's nothing about Torah in and of itself that will guarantee that it will be lived for the good. That's what I'm ready to say now. When I try to read the Torah, I try to say, oh, look, here's the Torah warning us. Don't misinterpret me, or don't blah, blah, blah. But I'm very conscious of the fact that somebody else, you know, won't see it that way. Mark, what do you want to say?
Well, so that contradicts the premise that started this whole discussion.
Why?
That it's not the study of Torah inherent, it is the right study of Torah. But that then begs the whole question, and I hear all of your answers and I buy all of your answers, but they don't answer the question how you tell what is the right study of Torah. And to say that Torah teaches you the right study of the Torah is just to beg that question. And when I said it was abysmal, I didn't mean that there weren't good aspects of it. I meant that taken as a whole, it doesn't guarantee its correct application. Historically.
So yes, so I definitely agree. It can't guarantee that. But what can I say? I think we're looking at it, or we can look at it from different angles. I think that there's, historically speaking, or just not historically speaking, currently speaking, right? In the contemporary reality that we live in, that's why I have to acknowledge that there are no guarantees. Because I see empirically that there are plenty of people that are immersed in the Torah and don't get it, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned. And as far as they're concerned, I don't get it. So I have to acknowledge that reality. So there is no checkmating that either one of us can do from the Torah. Here's the verse that finally proves that you're wrong and I'm right. Right? There isn't. Right? So that's what I'm saying. But on the other hand, I think that actually the common ground that I have with that guy in the black suit is that we both believe that we want that the Torah came to make more life and more goodness and more God. We're both convinced that the Torah is not some Gnostic, conspiracy theory product that's supposed to get us in trouble. Then we start diverging about where we find the good and where we don't. Can't help it. I know that's not satisfying. I wish, look, believe me, I wish I had a proof text that I could just mow everybody down with and get everybody to be on my side. But I don't think that it's there. If something, if Rabbi Akiva says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," ze klal gadol b'Torah. He says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That's the great principle of the Torah. Who said, maybe don't boil a kid in your mother's milk is the great principle of the Torah? But so how do we decide that? I don't know. But that's what our tradition tells us, right? All right, that's unfortunately the unsatisfying place where we're going to have to stop for tonight. I want to thank everybody for being open and honest and ready to keep on struggling about this. We're going into Shavuos. And as I said at the beginning, at a particularly difficult time for the Jewish people, for Israel, and for the world. And much of it, the difficulty besides, as I said, the bloodshed and the terrible destruction and suffering, is this moral dilemma. This is, forget about everybody else and whether they're good or bad or disgusting. What about us? What about us? Very, very hard. So may this Shavuos be a time when we can refresh ourselves, renew ourselves, and give ourselves a gift of life and goodness. Larry, you wanted to say something? No. Okay. All right. Kol Tuv.
Yosh Koach.